Welcome.
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 Welcome to the unlikely
Seminarian.
Welcome to the Unlikely Seminarian.
Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to another edition of the Unlikely Seminarian. I am your host, Dan Cook, and as always, I thank you ever so much for taking the time to listen. It means a lot, especially now because we're in a season where I haven't done many podcasts recently. Several of you have reached out and said, hey, is everything okay? And it is. I'm just in the midst of a spring semester that is taking a lot of my time. Long story short, there's a ton of reading this semester. This semester I'm taking 3 classes instead of the usual 2. One of those classes, the third class, the additional class, is a little bit lighter in terms of its workload than the other 2, but the other 2 are plenty, and having that third one on top of it just means that I'm spending a lot of my time either reading and doing homework for those classes, or on the rare chance that I get a free day, I just need to zone out and relax a little bit because it's so much work. So I apologize for this having taken so long, and I'll be real honest with you. I'm not sure when the next one's coming, but I did want to get something done, and I had a chance to spend some time and make it happen. So I decided to take advantage of that, and hopefully things will be a little bit more regular here in the next month or two. I hope. I have ideas for stuff that I want to talk about. It's just, again, finding the time to sit down and put everything together has been challenging as of late. So I appreciate your patience, and I wanted to offer that brief explanation as we start today. But what I chiefly want to talk about today is something that came up in the Old Testament survey class that I'm taking right now, which is fascinating, by the way. There's a ton of stuff in the Old Testament that maybe I was loosely familiar with, but getting into it in a little bit more depth and having more context to it has been a fascinating process. Again, a lot of reading involved, but fascinating. And so one of the things that I landed on, or I should say, I guess, that landed on me, is the idea of the Psalms. Any of you that are Christians, I'm sure, are familiar with the Psalms and are familiar with loosely their function. But going through this class has taught me things about the Psalms that I hadn't even considered before. And it's again, fascinating stuff. One of the things is breaking the Psalms down into categories. There are praise psalms, there are lament psalms, there are imprecatory psalms. There's all kinds of different versions, and there's subcategories. You can break the Psalms down in a bunch of different ways. But the category that really kind of jumped out at me was the Psalms of Lament. And I want to talk about those a little bit today, and I want to focus in on a specific one. For those of you who are members of Genesis Covenant Church along with me, I will give you a little bit of an inside hint. I'm going to be preaching on this particular psalm coming up in September. And so part of this process, admittedly, in doing this podcast is sort of thinking my way through this psalm and how I want to present it to help for that sermon. So consider this a draft of some of the things that I want to say in that sermon. So you'll get a bit of a preview if you're going to be there in September to hear me give what I hope is a more fleshed out version of this. First of all, Psalms of Lament mean pretty much what I think you'd expect them to mean. They're psalms of praise are psalms of thanking God for all the good stuff. Psalms of lament are asking God, what in the bleep over all the bad stuff? And I think they fill an important function that the modern Christian church has in many ways lost sight of. Or perhaps I should say the modern white evangelical church. I should be specific to my experience. That kind of church has lost sight of this. I think we are told too often that any amount of questioning, that any amount of doubt, that any amount of anger towards God is blasphemous. And we should put that out of our minds. And if we feel those emotions, then there's something wrong with us. I don't think that's true. And I haven't thought that was true in the entirety of the time that I've been a Christian, but I believe that learning about the Psalms of Lament has given me language with which to deal with those ideas. It has given me comfort in the sense that I'm not the only one that feels this way, and here it is right in the Bible, which should reinforce the fact that feeling that way in and of itself isn't sinful. what we do with those feelings, how we respond to those feelings, that's where sin can enter the picture. But that we feel them, that we communicate them, that we try to wrestle with them, that in and of itself I don't believe is sinful in the least. So I want to take a look at a particular Psalm of Lament so you guys get an idea of what I'm talking about. And again, remember the Psalms of Lament, the idea is that you're angry not even necessarily at God, although it can be at God, but you're angry about the state of the world. You're angry about the state of your life. You're angry about what's going on around you because you recognize that what's going on around you in your life, in your community, in your relationships with other people isn't what God has intended, isn't what God promised, isn't what God designed this reality to look like. We sort of intuitively understand that that's true, that this world doesn't work the way that it's supposed to. I think there's something sort of hardwired within us that we're always trying to look for something bigger and better and flashier and more interesting and more entertaining and more engaging and more satisfying. You know what I'm talking about? We're looking for things to fill a void that's created by the fact that the world isn't working the way it was designed to. I think we recognize this on a very deep and maybe even subconscious level. And so when we recognize this, certain emotions come to the fore very easily. Frustration, anger, sadness, regret. A lot of emotions that are categorized in the negative, right? And one thing that I think is very important to remember is that I don't believe emotions in and of themselves are bad things, are negative things, are things that we need to be apologetic for. I hear people all the time say, you know, I'm super angry about this, or I'm super disappointed about this, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't feel that way. I don't think should has anything to do with it, really. Feelings, emotions are spontaneous, they're reflexive, they're things that just come up, right? I mean, they're not, you don't plan to be angry, you don't plan to be sad, you don't plan to be happy or joyful. It's a reflexive response, if you will, to the state of your life, to the input that comes in around you. Those are very natural things. I think that's very human. I think we're designed to react in very natural ways like that, including anger, including sadness, including melancholy. I think those are all things that come very, very naturally, and I don't think we should have to apologize for them. Well, again, what we choose to do with them, how we choose to respond to them, all of that, you know, now we can enter into the world where we're making choices, and those choices can be criticized. But in how we react, I think that's just normal. So we live in a world, we're surrounded by things that aren't working the way that they're supposed to work. They aren't working the way that God wants them to work. We have that natural reaction to them. Now, what do we do? What do we do with it? We see in the book of Job where, you know, Job goes through some horrible, horrible afflictions, loses his family, loses his prosperity, loses his status in society through no fault of his own. And he gets angry, as I think anyone would, except his friends come around him and say, well, this must clearly be your fault. Job says, no, this isn't my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. What do you mean this is my fault? I know how that this is supposed to work. I'm good to God, God good to me, and then everybody's happy. And his friends, who don't want to see what's happened to Job happen to them, think, well, he must have done something to deserve this, because if he didn't do something to deserve this, and this is what happened to him, then that could very easily happen to me. I don't want that to happen to me, and I know I'm not going to do anything to deserve it, as I do scare quotes. So therefore, it must be something that he did. And I guess what I want to talk about is the idea that, no, there are circumstances beyond our control. There are things that happen to us that we don't deserve. Bad things do happen to good people, and those people have a right to be upset about it. How they're upset about it, what they do with that upset about it, that's the kind of thing that I want to talk about when we talk about the Psalms of Lament. And we're going to focus on a specific example of that in the next episode. I hope you'll join me. For now, my name is Dan Cook, and you've been listening to The Unlikely Seminarian.